We will start with considering the usage of things like laxatives, ointments and vaccines. Ointments and vaccines. It is a point of discussion in almost all the countries. Laxatives are very common in many countries, also in India. Some laxatives are of a local traditional preparations. Some are patents in the market, and neither of them are as dangerous as the third type of laxatives. The third type are homeopathic laxatives. In India, we have many traditional laxatives. The most non-dangerous and safest being castor oil. Castor. Yes. The only laxative accepted in the whole of Ayurveda is castor oil. But the very principle of laxatives is not so very good, because it deals with the immediate causes or the physical causes of constipation, and it tries to make daily adjustment and amelioration in the constitution, and a frequent use of laxative always leads to an immunity of the intestines to laxatives. And when the time of necessity occurs in any emergency, the fellow cannot have an advantage of using a laxative. A patient who is accustomed to use laxatives for about 10 or 20 years is bound to go into blockages of the lower organs because of the gradual insensibility and paralyzation of the eliminating organs. This is for two reasons. One is, when you consider the intelligence and subtlety of the vital force, it never permits any abnormality unless there is a sufficient cause behind. A process like constipation cannot be allowed or permitted by the vital force unless there is a sufficient cause. Of course, I am speaking of chronic constipation, not occasional. The very fact that a constitution shows chronic constipation indicates that there is a necessity to constipate, to save the constitution from a greater danger. Until the necessity is removed, the constitution never permits a total cure of constipation. In the meanwhile, we may be using local methods like medication, laxatives and purgatives, and sometimes mechanical methods, for example enema, etc. And they cause temporary relief and amelioration. But every time we apply such methods, we are ignoring the main cause, and we are causing great exertion to the lower side of the alimentary canal. And the more we use laxatives, the more the intestines develop immunity against laxatives. In course of time, we are obliged to change the medicine or increase the dose, causing greater strain and stress over the intestines and the rectum. The process goes on until there is almost a total insensibility of the intestines. There was a friend of my father when I was a boy who was suffering from chronic constipation since his childhood. He developed the habit of using enema daily, and gradually after 30 years his intestines lost the capacity of elimination totally, and gradually he had to exert a lot for about 1 hour or 1.5 hours when he was old. Finally, he died of total blockages of the lower organs. And the basic cause of such things discovered by Hahnemann and explained to us is that there is a basic disease which we call susceptibility, which cannot be eradicated by ordinary types of medication, and the constitution is in constant fight against that disease since the time of birth, because in many cases it is hereditary, and then in its process of a constant fight against the disease, it has to withdraw its application from 1, 2 or 3 of the organs that are functioning regularly. And since the vital force is most intelligent in its way of functioning, it begins to withdraw from the less dangerous and less important organs, preserving the heart and lungs to the last. So, whenever it is absolutely necessary and compulsory for the vital force to make a preservation of itself, to have an extra reserve of energy to conduct the constant fight against disease, it has to withdraw from one organ or other and leave the constitution a bit deficient of that organ, so that the person may take notice of it and try to cure the constitution in the right path. Or if the worst occurs, the fellow lives with a deficient functioning of that particular organ lifelong. So, a fellow suffering from an undercurrent of Sora will develop automatically a chronic complaint like constipation or sluggishness of the liver or a dullness of the kidneys and urinary tract, and then the fellow has to put up with the inconveniences. Since there was no scientific method discovered before Hahnemann to tackle the situation in the proper manner, the only methods humanity began to use were the physical methods, applying physical pressure or taking a brisk long walk in the morning, or sometimes a physical way of coaxing, that is they do like this for about 15 minutes or half an hour, or having enema or running. Such methods they used, and that gave a temporary mechanical relief. Afterwards, the use of medicinal substances was discovered, and it was considered in the beginning that the medicine should be used to relax the intestines. That is the birth of the laxatives. And the method is fundamentally wrong for two reasons. One is that we are tackling the function of an organ with the medicine, ignoring the intelligence of the vital force and not interrogating the vital force what it wants from us. So, the treatment is partial, local and piecemeal, directed to one particular organ. It is bound to be defective and it will have its own after effects. And according to Hahnemann and his followers, the after effects are a rapid exhaustion of the lower eliminating organs, a gradual paralyzation of the muscles and nerves with a progressive increase of the same complaint. That is, the constipation is becoming worse and worse as we use medicines. The body developing a resistance against the medicines we use, for the simple reason that the medicine is not required or welcome by the constitution. We are forcing the vital force to behave according to our intelligence, not knowing the fact that the vital force has a better intelligence. So, we have no understanding to cooperate with the vital force and remove the blockage from the vital plane. This is one reason why it is bad. And after a certain age, the intestines refuse to react to any medicine because they are almost dead as a result of our continuous misbehavior in introducing the laxatives. And as old age begins to set in, the fellow and the doctor have to meet a situation when there is a total blockage and when no medicine comes to our aid. Same thing with urination also, and we should be very careful in treating cases where there is suppression of urine or blockages. The same principle holds good. And another scientific aspect, which is a new dimension to the existing science, is there are what are called the reciprocal points in our constitution. If we take any point on top of the head, it has its own corresponding point at the tip of the coccyx, and they have a reflex action upon each other. That is, any disturbance created in one point will have its reflected action on the other, and vice versa. This branch of science is not yet known to the modern world, but there were ancient scientists from 3 or 4 nations who knew the fact. You find this aspect in the 3rd book of the Medica of Hippocrates, under the law of reciprocals, and you will find this in 3 or 4 textbooks of ancient textbooks of Ayurveda and some ancient Indian textbooks of astrodiagnosis, that is applied astrology, astrology applied to medicine. And according to this law, whenever we apply some wrong treatment to a part of the vertebral column, it leaves a weak spot on the corresponding center on the upper pole, which awaits its own day to punish us. And according to this law, there is a center developing in the brain cells and the cerebrospinal nervous system, from which the mind is gradually withdrawing. You can call it a mind vacuum in the brain cells, and this creates a gradual insensibility in the fellow in an increasing degree. In the early years, the fellow finds some dullness. He thinks it may be occasional, but it exists with him and gradually increases. And after some time, he begins to feel some drowsiness. Next degree is feels sleepy. Even during the active hours of his work, a fraction of himself is sleeping inevitably. You will find the same thing in increasing degree when there is a tendency to develop sugar in urine. And in the end, this kills the diabetic. The fellow straight goes into coma and has a very happy death. Yes, because there is no trouble, he sleeps away into death. And irrespective of the diabetes condition, this continues when we make a frequent use of laxatives and purgatives. You can find these lines in unmistakable and clear phrases in the introduction chapters of Hahnemann, written to his Materia Medica of Chronic Diseases. He has warned us very strongly against the use of frequent use of laxatives and purgatives. And what to do? The procedure is always same. The homeopathic way of approaching the chronic disease. You take the case history completely, try to understand the constitution and the constitutional drug, and proceed in the same systematic manner which we are expected to do with any other chronic disease. The intestines should be made to expel excretory matter. We should not interfere with the function and try to help the intestines mechanically or locally. Now, the same thing happens whenever we apply mechanical or local methods to any inconvenience. This is the reason why laxatives are discouraged in true homeopathy, unless there is an emergency situation. Emergency is quite different. You can use laxatives to save the life, and you can use it for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days or 1 week. In the meanwhile, you have to begin the treatment on the constitutional level and help the intestines eliminate. So, here also a true homeopath has no compromise. And unfortunately, we have homeopathic pharmacies also manufacturing laxatives. I don't know how it is here. In India, we have homeopathic pharmacies preparing laxatives. They say this is a homeopathic laxative. I said, who knows, tomorrow there may be homeopathic enema cans and injection needles prepared orthodox in an orthodox method exclusively for homeopathy. So, it is as meaningless as having homeopathic enema cans and homeopathic injection needles. So, let us try to approach from the right direction, not from the wrong direction. Experience tells us that in 80% of the cases, the patient begins to respond within the first 2 months and begins to eliminate for himself more regularly by a scientific way of homeopathic treatment. So, we are essentially against the use of laxatives and purgatives, and the orthodox Ayurvedic people, they are inclined to believe in using castor oil because it has no medicinal effects and not even a single drop of it is accepted by the human metabolism when it passes through the alimentary canal. So, it is a mysterious substance which passes as it is, and for that reason the traditional Ayurvedics use it, and it has no after effects upon the constitution. But strictly speaking, a frequent use of even castor oil is prohibited because the process itself is against the functions of the constitution. And in some traditions of some countries, I don't know whether it is in vogue in Europe or not, there are people and physicians who believe that it is good to take a purgative in some intervals, and especially in the junctions of seasons. Whenever there is a season change and a climatic change, for example, the rise of the year and the fall of the year, even that is not a sound principle. When the constitution is rendered more and more healthy in its true sense, it knows better and it does its own functions better. This is not only my view, masters who gave us homeopathy. And in this connection, I make a suggestion to those who know astrology, the relationship between 2 points of the circle 180 degrees apart, and that particular degree which represents your head in your horoscope has its opposite degree at your tail. Apply this principle for astrodiagnosis and apply this in knowing certain things in the functions of the constitution, in diagnosing a disease and fixing up the treatment. For example, if you take the sign Taurus, there is its opposite Scorpio, and when you apply this to the theory of chronic miasms in homeopathy, a patient of psychosis has these 60 degrees affected in his constitution mainly. His Taurus and his Scorpio are affected for the simple reason that the disease was contracted by the activity of Scorpio. I think you know Scorpio governs the genitals, and psychosis is contracted through sex. And when we do not care to eliminate the gonorrheal poison properly, it gets amalgamated into the constitution, and on the upper pole it is the ear, nose, throat that are affected, including the bronchus. The fellow will be repeatedly having the troubles belonging to these organs. The throat is inflamed again and again. The tonsils developed, or the adenoids enlarged. Yes, or there is trouble of aphtha again and again. And when you are very much successful in suppressing them through strong and violent medication, the lower pole begins to respond wrongly. That is, gradually there is a trouble with the intestines, rectum and anus and urinary tract. So, whenever you use laxatives here, automatically there is added trouble to the upper portion, upper organs also. Unless the cure is total and scientific and systematic, whenever you attempt a piecemeal medication, the fellow is better in one pole and simultaneously worse in the other pole. And if he is better in the upper pole, he is worse in the lower pole. After a few decades of constant medication on the wrong lines, he grows worse in the two poles. This is a point of interest. Excuse me, I made a digression from the main topic. But it is very interesting how these ancient scientists could locate these things. They called it the law of polarities. And about vaccination, we have wonderful advantages of vaccination. In many countries, we have many diseases rooted out, and there is no smallpox or no chickenpox in some countries, and no tuberculosis, no gonorrhea, no syphilis, etc. That's nice. Have we eradicated or eliminated or cured the nations? Dr. Burnett, the great doctor who has discovered tuberculinum and who has conducted many valuable researches on the line, have discovered many strange things as results of vaccination. Whenever we take a vaccination for one disease, it stimulates the antibodies in the constitution for life and renders that particular disease impossible to develop in the constitution. But at the same time, it gives its own miasm to the constitution for life, and as a result of which the fellow is no more the original fellow in any one of the vital functions of his body or mind. And this precipitates a condition, a total miasm of the person, which incubates in the constitution for about 2 or 3 decades. The process of incubation is very long, and we have not yet methods to eliminate the poison that is engrafted in the constitution through vaccination. We welcomed a lymph into the constitution on the physical plane, and we have no method